It's right here in black and white. Remember, we need to pass these around. Okay? As Madison expressed it, did I tell you that the counties are supposed to be involved in this too? Counties, cities, school boards? Can you believe it that Justice Scalia is actually quoting the Founding Fathers? He's quoting the Federalist Papers. He's quoting Madison. He says, as Madison expressed it, the local or municipal authorities form distinct and independent portions of the supremacy. What is Barack Obama using to sue Arizona right now? What is he using? He's using the supremacy clause. It just said here that the counties and cities form distinct and independent portions of the supremacy. No more subject within their respective spheres to the general authority than the general authority is subject to them within its own sphere. Remember, where do we define the sphere of federal authority? Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. It might be nice to have people read this, or both of them. It won't take very long, I promise. This takes 10 minutes. 10 minutes. And you'll know more about the 10th Amendment and state sovereignty in 10 minutes than 99.9% of all your politicians in this whole country and in this state. Can you see the power of this now? Do you see where you're at with the power? Now, this separation, this is Scalia still talking, this separation of the two spheres is one of the Constitution's structural protections of liberty. That's the bottom of page 8. Did you hear what I said? A structural protection of liberty that the federal government and the state government be a check and balance for each other. And that when the federal government goes too far, who's going to enforce the 10th Amendment? The feds? The states have to enforce their own sovereignty. The federal government isn't going to protect your state's sovereignty. They're the ones destroying it. I'll be the first one to admit, I say some radical things sometimes. My wife always tells me not to do that. Folks, it's in this book, and it's on my website. Believe me, I'm not pleased to tell you this. The fact remains that the greatest threat to our God-given constitutional American liberty is our own federal government. Okay? Now in this book on page 19, I quote James Madison. And James Madison said, we can safely rely on the disposition of state legislatures to erect barriers against the encroachments of the national authority. Well, that's one of them. Madison also goes on and says, there are more instances of the abridgment of freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments from those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. Friends, the only problem is that Madison's warning about silent and gradual encroachments, they're not silent and they're not gradual. They're bold right in our face. And that's what has created the Tea Party movement across this country. And it's why I stand here in front of you today. Now, at the very first page, Thomas Jefferson warns each of us that when all government shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks provided and become as venal and oppressive as the government from which we separated. Now, when government becomes venal and oppressive, let me ask each of you, anywhere in the state of Washington, especially anywhere in the county of Stevens, when government becomes venal and oppressive, to whom can the people turn for peace, safety, and protection? You hired him, you pay his salary, and you got him there, and he better have some courage, and he better have some knowledge, and he better have some support from you. And you know what? He's running kind of an uphill campaign, and he probably ought to get some financial support from you guys tonight. And I'm telling you, he can't do it without it. Now, what did the Founding Fathers pledge to each other? Our lives and our fortunes and our sacred honor. I'm not going to tell you to spend your fortune here tonight. I am asking you to get a few of these books a few of these and know and understand this knowledge, because knowledge and truth and power will set you free. And I'm not going to tell you to pledge your fortune to Russell tonight either, but do what you can. Do what you can. And maybe a little bit more than you can. Okay? But you still got to take care of your families too, and we all know that, and Russell sure knows it. He's a good man, and he knows and understands that principle. Now, so, this case now makes you wonder about where we go. What is a constitutional sheriff? Well, I like to put it in historical perspective. In about 1958, there was a law in this country that said a black citizen, a black American, had to give their seat to a white man. And that happened in Montgomery, Alabama. And Rosa Parks is arrested because she refused. Now, some people say, oh, what does that have to do with us? Well, you know, we don't get involved in that. I said, folks, this is one of the things that happened in our history that helps what we're trying to say and portray here today. Don't ever forget that. This is one of the most powerful things to support Tea Party movements, that we stand against stupid laws. Okay? We don't enforce. We don't obey. We don't respect stupid laws. And this is the best one because the other side agrees with us on this one. That's why we use it to our benefit. When Rosa Parks was arrested, what should have happened? She was booked into the county jail. Her picture was taken and her fingerprints taken, just like any other criminal. A constitutional sheriff. Now ask any sheriff in this country, knowing what we know now, sheriff, if you were the sheriff called when Rosa Parks refused to give her seat to a white man, what would you do now? Well, this is what I would do. I would go on that bus, and this is what a constitutional sheriff would do, not just me. A constitutional sheriff would go on that bus and say, ma'am, what seems to be the problem here? And she looks up at him kind of timidly and she goes, why can't we just be left alone? Anybody agree with that? Yeah. You know what it's called when government leaves you alone? Freedom! Yeah. And so she says that to him, and the sheriff sits down next to her. Really surprises her here. A constitutional sheriff sits down next to a citizen. And he says, ma'am, can I shake your hand? And he shakes her hand, and she still doesn't know what's going on. He said, what you did here today took a lot of courage. And he says, while I'm here, where do you get off? And she said, 2 stops up on Elm Street. He says, do you mind if I walk you home? I've got a deputy with me. We want to make sure you get home safely. She goes, sure. So they're walking her home because they knew there might be some trouble. They knew some people might be trying to retaliate and put her in her place. And he goes, and there's Mr. Parks, and he's going, what's going on? What's the problem, Sheriff? What's up? And he goes, calm down, everything's fine. But Mr. Parks, do you have a gun in the home? He goes, I sure do, 12-gauge shotgun. And he goes, the sheriff says, is it loaded? He says, doesn't do you any good if it's not. And he says, make sure it's loaded. Make sure you keep it close by because there could be trouble in the town. But this deputy's going to be giving you extra patrol all night long. But we can't be here 24 hours a day. And so we want to make sure that you're able to protect yourselves too. And he says, great. Friends, that's a constitutional sheriff. And he does the same thing for Rosa Parks, the gun owner today. Or Rosa Parks, the farmer. Rosa Parks, the rancher. Rosa Parks, the homeschooler. Or Rosa Parks, oh, heaven forbid, the tax protester. God bless all the tax protesters in this country, you know.